Good morning. My name is Ken Ludwig. I'm with the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. And today we are at American Legion Post 72 in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it's my honor to be able to interview and hear the story of Mr. Harold Joseph Kraus, a World War II vet that was in the Navy. He's a radio instrument operator on a Torpedo Avenger Squadron, and we're going to hear his life story. So with that, good morning, Mr. Kraus.
Good morning, Ken.
How are you, sir?
Fine.
I'd like to start out by asking you just some of your family background, where you were born, where you went to school, what your mom and dad did.
Okay, goes back to 1924 on a cold wintry day in a little town called Charles City, Iowa. And it was cold that morning, my parents told me, and they almost froze getting me back from the hospital. And then from then it went, I was about 3 years old when, of course, the Big Depression came. My parents were kind of in a bind, neither one having very good jobs, so they decided that they were going to part company, and so I was taken to a children's home in South Chicago at age 3, and I stayed there, went to school, and at age 8, my father came and took me out of the home. He had remarried, and I went to live with him and his new wife in Beloit, Wisconsin. Nice little town. My father was in the dairy business. He, believe it or not, he made ice cream. And he did that for his whole complete life. And as time went on, then he got a better job, and we all moved. I better back up there just a minute. In the meantime, I got married, and my wife and I and my parents moved to Amory, Wisconsin, where he had a job there in an ice cream factory there also. And so I got a job with an electric company there. If you can visualize, back in the 30s and 40s, there were farms and everything out there, huge farms, that didn't have any electric, didn't have any water, didn't have any sewer. So we would go out to the different farms and wire them, anticipation for the power companies to run lines out there to them. And if you've ever worked on a cold wintry day in a barn full of cows, and cows are very nervous, when I went home I smelled like a cow. So anyway, this was not very appealing to my wife, who then was pregnant, so I had to eat out on the porch. Then after our little girl was born, she weighed 9 pounds, 5 ounces. We moved back then because she was longing to be back with her family. So we went back then to Covington, Kentucky. And when we got back there, I got a job. Her father worked in the crew tower, and he knew a foreman with the Cincinnati Gas and Electric Company. So he talked to him about me needing a job, and being good friends as they were, I started work at the Cincinnati Gas and Electric Company at 1949, and I worked there until 1984. So in the meantime then, plus our little daughter that we had in Amory, Wisconsin, we had 5 more children, and so life then became really nice. And of course we took vacations like normal white people do. And
That's okay, you're fine.
And so then we really enjoyed it. The children all grew up. I had one son that went to college, and he also went to work for the gas electric company. And my youngest son then, he also went to work, and as a matter of fact, he is still working for Duke now. It went from CG&E to Sin Energy, and then to Duke, and he is still working there now. I also have a son-in-law that has worked at Duke. So most of the family's been in you want to,
The electric business.
yeah, in the electric business, or as you want to say, if you want to take gas, that's where most of them were. So then, well, I better back up now because I got too far ahead of myself. I went to school in Covington at Dixie Heights High School and graduated in 1943, May the 29th, 1943. Of course, I already had my draft papers, so I knew what my future was, and I graduated May the 29th of 43, and July the 27th of 43, I was in boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois. That was a 9-week course. When we finished that, we got a two-week leave to go home and see the family again. And then after that, we returned back to the Great Lakes, and they told us that I, among others, was going to Memphis, Tennessee, to a radio radar gunnery school. That course lasted 13 weeks, and then again we got a little leave to go home. When we came back, we were told we were going to Hollywood, Florida, to a gunnery school. So went to the gunnery school and took all of that, and when that was finished, go home again for another leave, come back, and they told us, now you're going to Jacksonville, Florida. You're going to take training in PBYs. PBYs is a patrol bomber that would take care of downed pilots, shipwrecked people, anything like that. So when we got to the Great Lakes, when we got to San Diego, that's where we were supposed to report to, we found out that our pilots that we had trained with in Jacksonville, Florida in the PBYs had only got 2 weeks vacation, so they got to San Diego before we did, because we got 4 weeks. So, of course, when we got there, we were told that our pilots had picked up some other air crewmen that were there ahead of us, and so they were gone, so now we don't have any pilots. So all of us that were there for that training found out that we were more or less adrift, and we were put in general detail, which we did whatever they wanted us to. And then I got a letter from my parents, said that the FBI had been to the house wanting to know a little of my background and all the other stuff about me. And then I was notified by the powers to be in San Diego that I was going to San Clemente Island. That's about 60 miles off the coast of Los Angeles. And there you were going to take countermeasure training. Now, when I tell people that I was a countermeasure operator, they didn't have the slightest idea what countermeasure is. Just to give you a brief description, if you can visualize Reynolds wrap, that's about what this stuff was, and they could cut that to a frequency that we later would get when we flew over Japan, so we'd know what frequencies the Japanese had on their radio and radar. Excuse me. And then we would report that back to the officer in charge, and he then worked out a formula, and they cut this Reynolds wrap in strips, maybe about a half an inch wide by about a foot long. And then we would put wraps around this with a stack about like this. So the idea was to throw this out, of course break the strips, and then throw it out of the plane. And of course the Japanese would see this coming floating down, and that looked like a slow-moving bomber, so they would concentrate on that. So all they did was shoot all of our Reynolds wrap up. Of course, it saved the planes, which then we couldn't cut it fast enough, because at first they thought, well, this is stupid, throwing Reynolds wrap out of that airplane. So after that little incident there, they were over eager to get more, so we couldn't cut the stuff fast enough. So then with all the other trips then, now I was not a member of the 82nd Air Group. I was a fill-in because of being a countermeasure operator. But I still was listed as in the 82nd Air Group. And the aircraft carrier, well, let me back up. Then after going to San Clemente and finishing that, then I went back to the States again. And then they said, go back to Honolulu. So I went back to Honolulu. And then from there, we were flown out to Guam. And Guam at the time, in the 40s, still was kind of odoriferous because they had burned a lot of the Japanese out of there, and it wasn't a very pleasant atmosphere. But we weren't there but about a day, and then we were taken aboard the aircraft carrier, the USS Bennington, CV-20. It was 820 feet long, had 3,950 officers and enlisted men, excluding the squadrons that were on. Now, the squadrons consisted of 4 different branches, or I should say 4 different groups. The Marines flew F-4U Corsairs. The Navy flew SB-2C dive bombers, which had replaced the SBD dive bomber, and F-6F fighters that the Navy had, and then the torpedo planes, TBF Avengers, that the Navy also had. I was on that. Now, the Avenger is the largest single-engine plane in World War II. It had a 112-foot wingspan, and the noise was tremendous. It was a Wright engine. So that was the fun part. And in order to get into the TBF at that time, there was a small hatch about like this, and so you had to climb through with your parachute and everything on, which made it kind of a little bit difficult if you had to get out in a hurry, if you were shot at or had to jump out in midair. So, but thank goodness we were only hit once, so that wasn't enough to even stop the plane. So,
Could I ask you a question about that plane?
yes, sir.
It didn't have ejection seats back in that day?
Oh, Lord, no. No.
The tops didn't come off then, you just had a portal to go out.
That's it.
Wow.
And the pilot, of course, all he had to do was slide his canopy back, and then he could get out on the wing and jump. The turret gunner, which was above me, he had to drop his footrest down and come down off the turret into where I was.
I see.
So this was a small opening for us both to try to get through, which was impossible.
Wow.
Now,
Okay.
let me just backtrack a minute.
Okay.
George W. Bush also flew a TBF Avenger, and he was shot down twice. First time, him and both of his crew members got out alive. The second crash he did, he was the only one who got out alive. The turret gunner and the radio operator both were killed. So that brings us up now to the different sorties that, and like I said, when I first got aboard the carrier, the radio operator in the bottom had twin 50 caliber machine guns that shot out the back. So in order to put the radio gear and everything in there, they took the twin 50s or twin 30s out and put the radio gear in. The turret gunner up above had twin 50 caliber, and of course he was in good shape. So the first thing I had to do when I got aboard the carrier was then I would fly and listen to my radio to pick up any signals I could from the Japanese, because we were flying over the territory there. So I would take those back, give them to the countermeasure operator or officer, and he would then calibrate what those frequencies were and fit us all the dive bombers, because it was hard for the torpedo, because they'd have to slide their canopy back and throw it out. The turret gunner, he was inside of a dome, so he couldn't do anything. So it was mostly the dive bombers that they gave the window to, because they would definitely be with the fighters, who were traveling too fast to throw it out anyway, and the torpedo bombers, which were slower than the whole bunch. We landed at about 93 miles an hour coming back aboard the carrier. And I'm telling you, the first time that I took that flight, and I looked out I had a small porthole about this big, and I looked down there, and here was this aircraft carrier. It looked about this big. And the audience said, there's no way we're ever going to get back aboard that thing. But the pilot, of course, I flew with the commander of the squadron, Lieutenant Commander DeGamo, and he was a crackerjack pilot, and we made it back every time.
What was his rank, do you know? What was his rank?
Commander.
Okay, so.
Commander DeGarmo, yeah. And so then, other than that, on the regular flights, they would naturally use the air crewmen that came with the 82nd Air Group. And then, of course, if one of them was sick or whatever, then there was two countermeasure guys, myself and another one, and so we would just fly whenever there was an opening. One good thing about that, though, every time you did fly, you go right down to sick bay, and you got, these little bottles of whiskey or whatever that you get on an airplane when you fly. We each got one of those after every flight. So that made...
Calm the nerves, huh?
Calm the nerves. But that was the good part.
I want to expand on something real quick. You said they threw them out, the bombs?
No, the window. That's what it was called. That countermeasure stuff that we cut was called window. And they would just throw it out, and then as soon as it hit the air, it would all just fly in all directions.
Flutter, okay, yeah.
Which then made a great big pattern. The Japanese would see that on the radar and think that was a slow-moving bomber. They couldn't determine a plane from whatever. Okay. And of course, anything that big in the sky, they figured it had to be a bomber. So that was in our favor too. Some of the flights that we made, and I made this one, was the Japanese had the largest battleship. It was called the Yamato. And I think it was evidently a lot of them knew that the war wasn't going good for Japan. So they loaded a bunch of guys up, and I don't think they had an intent of getting back, because they didn't put up much resistance and anything, and we just bombed the bejeevers out of them and sunk the battleship. And that was the biggest battleship they had. And while we were at sea then, we got the word that President Roosevelt had passed away. It was in '45. And also then on June the 5th, if my memory serves me right, we were hit by a typhoon. If you can visualize the edges of the flight deck were like this. After that typhoon, those big beams and everything were just bent down like that. So in order to launch aircraft from then on, they had to stop the ship and back up, which was dangerous waters out in then, because there were Jap submarines and everything out there. So, but we had to get the planes in the air, so they would back the ship up, launch aircraft, and then stop, and then go forward again. So that made life a little tedious too for the pilots. Then I was just trying to think, when we covered the invasion of Okinawa, we covered the invasion of Okinawa and Iwo Jima. Okinawa was invaded on Easter Sunday, and I was on a flight then, and as we were making our bombing runs in, I looked there, and every battleship was lined up bow to stern. As far as you can see, battleships. And they would just fire those big 16-inch guns, and the waves were high. When those guns went off, that water was just as smooth as glass from the concussion of the ends of the barrels of those guns.
And that was Okinawa?
At battle, yes. Okay. That was the invasion of Okinawa.
Okay.
And then we covered the invasion of Iwo Jima. Of course, I have a history of all the flights that we made. Even though I wasn't on them, I still wanted to know. I don't think anybody else on board ship has got those. So, but when we were aboard ship, we were out 7 months. We never saw land per se. We didn't see any human beings. Anytime we had to get refueled, we would pull into an island called Mogmog. And there we'd get the refuel. Of course, at night, when you couldn't do nothing else, we had movies on the flight deck, and everybody was there. And that was the one night we were all watching the movies, and all of a sudden the Japanese came over, and the kamikazes were diving all around us. The Randolph got hit twice, and we saw one pilot. He must have thought there was an airfield on Mog Mog, and he must have thought that was a carrier flight deck, and he dove that plane of his right down into the ground and blew himself up in his plane and wrecked the airfield. So anyway, then back out to sea again, and then it was after that the flight deck got damaged and everything. So with the flight deck damage, we were ordered then to go back to Leyte. So we went out of the war zone, then back to Leyte, and then from then I was transferred onto a Jeep and taken back to, we went back to San Francisco.
Okay.
And that was late in 45. And then we went home for a 30-day leave, and then we were supposed to go back to Memphis, Tennessee for a refresher course in radio and radar again, but while we were home on leave, the Japanese surrendered. So then we got a letter saying, go to go directly to Corpus Christi, Texas. And when we got to Corpus Christi, we didn't know what we were going to do there because the war was over. There was no more schooling to go to. So when we got there, they said, your duties will be to guard prisoners of war. So that had been a base for German and Italian prisoners. We didn't have any Japanese. They were all from the European theater. And so we would go each day and get 10, 12 men, whatever, and take them out. They would wash windows in the officers' houses, trim shrubs, cut grass, and all this kind of stuff. So just to keep them busy. So then, the war being over with, I guess they wanted to get rid of all of us guys. So then we got notice that we were being shipped to Houston, Texas. And so there on the 15th of April of 46, I got my goodbye papers and went back home.
Okay. I want to back up. I want to go back to Iwo Jima.
Yes.
And
Okinawa?
Okinawa, and then Tokyo.
Okay.
And what role did you play in the bombing of Iwo Jima?
None.
None.
Yeah, well, no, yes, we did. We did, but it was, well, Iwo Jima, number one, the Japs were dug in there because the battleships also laid off there and shelled that island, something drastic.
Right.
But the Japs had already built all these caverns and everything in the mountain.
The tunnels.
So yes, so it didn't do any damage at all. And it's the same way with us.
Okay,
We
where were
just
you
bombed.
at when we bombed Hiroshima?
Iwo Ji- say?
Not Hiroshima, I'm sorry.
Okinawa?
No, Nagasaki and,
That we had nothing to do with that.
well, where were you at when it happened?
Oh,
Were you at sea?
no, I think I was back home by then. But get back to the carrier again. Excuse me. One flight that I was on, we had word that there was a factory of some kind, ball bearing, airplane parts or something being built. So we were loaded with 2 500-pound incendiary bombs. And we were going to go and bomb that. We got all the way over into into Japan, and I could see Mount Fujiyama. I saw that on my 21st birthday. And anyway, we went there and got close to where we were supposed to bomb, and they aborted the mission. They said, go back, there is a prisoner of war camp right close to that factory. So we turned around. Now, what are you going to do with 2 500-pound incendiary bombs? You couldn't land aboard the carrier with them. So all 15 planes. There was 15 planes in each squadron. We dropped all those incendiary bombs in the ocean.
Wow.
Second time that I was on another flight, we were going after, they'd spotted shipping, Japanese shipping out there. So we were loaded with a 2,000-pound torpedo, which this plane was originally designed for. So we're flying around there, could not find the ships anywhere. So they said, okay, come on back to the ship. Now, what are you going to do with a 2,000-pound torpedo? Wrong. We didn't drop it in the ocean. We landed with it.
Oh, boy.
Yes. So that was, put us on needles and pins for a few minutes there, too.
So you were a little more comfortable with the landing on board carriers by then, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. Then it looked like a big ship.
There you go.
But anyway, I can't think of anything else. Oh, one other thing. Oh, this kills me. When we got aboard the carrier, of course, they sounded general quarters. And all the air crews, see, the air crews all had a ready room where we would go to get all the garbage we were supposed to be told. And so we were told then that if there was an air raid at any time, you were to go to the officer's wardroom. Well, the officer's wardroom was 7 decks down in that carrier. So the first time, my buddy and I both head for the hatches. Now, in an emergency like that, the rule is, now this may not be, it could be either way. Down port, up starboard, which means everybody going down the ladders, not steps, ladders in the Navy, would go down the port side, and those coming up would come up the starboard side. Okay, so we did that, and of course then the last guy that would go through the hatches would dog them down, close them and dog them. Well, by the time we got down, and oh, the wardroom was beautiful, you know, we just sat there and chit-chat. Now we happened to think, what if a torpedo hit this thing, and you're 7 decks down, and all the hatches are battened down? You know what that means? Goodbye. So my buddy and I decided, let's drag. So the other guys, they're going like gangbusters out to dogging the hatches and everything. Him and I stayed on the hangar deck. And from there, we watched the whole war.
Wow.
Every time there was a general quarters, we didn't make it to the last hatch.
Did you see some of the dive bombing of the Japanese planes?
Oh, yeah.
On the destroyers?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and like I say, you could see, well, as you know, every third bullet in the machine guns is a tracer. Okay, well, you could just see what was doing. Well, our planes were out there flying. The Japanese planes were flying. They're fighting out there, and we're shooting out it that way, too. I don't know why we didn't shoot somebody down, either ours or theirs, but they didn't. Now, aboard the carrier, this being a later model carrier, commissioned in '42, we didn't have 50 caliber machine guns on the deck edge. We had 20 millimeter. And then we had 20s, 40s, and 5-inch on the carrier.
Cannons.
Yeah, cannons. We didn't, of course, they didn't put no 16 inches on a carrier. But it was a beautiful, beautiful carrier. Like I say, it was commissioned in late '42, so it had all the latest whatevers.
Right.
And so anyway, so let's see, now okay, we come home now, and now we go back to Corpus Christi. Okay, all right, now, so I'm out. Then on April the 15th of '46, I'm discharged. I go back home. They give me $200 and said, adios, amigo.
And that was it.
Yes.
Now, do you ever stay in touch? Do you have a reunion of any kind from
No.
your outfit?
No, that's what I'm saying. I was not original 82nd Air Group bunch. So, yeah, we knew some of the guys there, but not as much as the other countermeasure and I, because we went through school together, and I don't know whether he trained in PBYs or not. I don't remember that, but anyway, that really was the only friend I had aboard the carrier, and it was really outfitted. It had a soda fountain, it had a ship store where you could get candy and all other kind of stuff. So it wasn't, and I remember anytime the destroyers had to be refueled, of course, then they would shoot a line over to the destroyer that pulled up alongside of us, and then they would pull the line across, and they'd pull the hose across, and oh, we hit some bad weather, and those little destroyers would go like right after that, and go boom, and they'd hit that water, and man, those poor guys on that thing, I'm telling you, us, of course, we're just going along smooth as
That
glass.
had to be a sight, though, to see him
Oh, yeah.
refuel like that.
But we had to do that at sea. We didn't beach for that. Okay, that's about.
Okay, we're back again. We just took a short recess. Mr. Kraus, I just want to kind of go back a little bit to when you were in high school over at Dixie Heights. And were you drafted, or did you enlist in the Navy?
I already had my papers before I graduated from high school, which was May the 29th of '43. And so I knew that I was going in the service, but I didn't, of course, you don't have an option when you're drafted. They tell you where you go. So.
And what branch?
And what branch, right. So I got the call then that I was to report to Fort Thomas. That was the induction center for my area. So I got over there that day, and of course you have to have a physical and all this kind of stuff just to see whether you're qualified or not. And so then it came down to, Mr. Kraus, what branch would you like to go to? I said, well, my first preference would be Marines. My second would be the Army. He said, Mr. Kraus, you are now in the Navy. So I knew then what branch, and then they told me it was going to be, I would get my training in the Great Lakes, and there was a new camp that had just opened up because the influx of inductees going was more than what the camps were already built. So I went to a new camp, Maurey, M-A-U-R-E-Y, camp in the Great Lakes, and that's where I took the training.
Okay. Now, the war was already on.
Oh, yes.
By then.
Yes,
And,
yes.
So you kind of knew you were going to be in the middle of something.
That's right.
So what was your thoughts? What were you, I mean, you're 19 years old,
Yeah.
scared
Well,
to death probably, you didn't know where you
That's
were
what I
at.
was saying. Didn't have the slightest idea that it was going to be the Navy, which was, once you're drafted and told what it is, that's what it is. There's no getting out of it.
Right.
So when I got to the Great Lakes then, and like I say, it was not the best camp, but it was as good as they could make in the time that they had to get it made. And of course, our group was real good, and we had the usual marching and all this kind of stuff. And so I was lucky one time because when you had to go on KP, you didn't exactly say you could either get the Chief's KP or you could get the enlisted man's KP. Of course, the Chiefs eat better than the enlisted men did, so I just figured, well, what the heck, whatever I get, still get to eat. So, and I was the last one that was picked for the Chiefs mess, so I thought that was pretty decent. And so then when it was just about over, we were individually called in. They said, well, now, what branch of the Navy would you like to go to? And I said, well, my first choice would be submarines. My second choice was PT boats. They gave me the Air Corps.
Okay.
So it seemed that I got everything that I wasn't looking for right from the get-go. But everything turned out good, so at least I wasn't over in the Europe theater there and getting shot up, so I guess I was pretty lucky at that.
There you go. Okay, very good. I mean, if you have nothing else to add, once again, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to do this project with us.
You're quite welcome.
And as always, the World War II guys, the greatest generation of all time. And sir, I'd like to thank you for your service to this country.
Thank you
God
very much.
bless you.
Thank you.